Welcome to the Paranormal Conspiracy Paracon podcast. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Callan.
And following our trend this week, we're covering something that's somewhat well known for sure, but certainly not well known to everyone. It's a local legend, something that's certainly known without great detail outside of its region. So pretty sure this one's close to home for Cal.
Yeah, it's a big story, but we're going to try to keep it rooted in the local vicinity, because it's we'll tease it a little bit, but we'll get there obviously eventually. Victoria, BC, the capital of British Columbia in Canada. It's just a day's travel from Vancouver, where I live. Vancouver, much more well known, and it's got a bit of a complicated history. Victoria does. There's often a bit of a battle to distinguish what's sensationalism, what's fact, in terms of popular opinion and even for law enforcement. But one thing that you can't really dispute is the reputation that Victoria has, and what I'm referring to is a satanic cult activity, specifically like satanic extremists. It's an important distinction. So people who are practicing in unorthodox and unethical ways, let's say, and Victoria has a reputation for being a satanic capital, and I don't know if anybody's really heard this south of the border, but certainly throughout BC, everywhere I've lived, that's something that's every now and again talked about.
It definitely seems like it's a Canada thing. I know the Satanic Church opened up here in LA, so in California. So I'm pretty sure that's where most of the focus. I'm pretty sure it's LA. I could be wrong. Hotel California, if you from the Eagles, is pretty much based around this hotel somewhere, I believe in Palm Springs, that was bought by the Satanic Church. And I'm gonna just do some research real quick.
In 1966, I believe, is when the church was established.
The Satanic Temple. It's in. Yeah, I don't know, but because I'm looking it up, and I feel like it should be the first thing that comes up, but it's nah.
Well, it's all right. I mean, either way, keeping it grounded in my experience, it's definitely the sort of thing that, even in high school, I remember there was a girl I was interested in that was trying to tell me that she wanted to move to Victoria because it was this hub for Satanists, and think what you will of that, but it was.
I was gonna say,
yeah. I couldn't really get much more out of her than that. I didn't know where she was getting this information or what made it this supposed hub. But I think doing a little bit of digging for this story in this episode, I think I know why now. And a lot of people are going to know the crown jewel of the story here, but we're going to try to keep it to do with Victoria in particular. The crown jewel being a book published in 1980 by the name of Michelle Remembers, which is a famous name. Anybody who doesn't know it will dip into it a little bit, but it's frequently credited with sparking one of the spikes of satanic panic, let's say, in the 80s and 90s, just because of its graphic and allegedly true nature. These things that happened to the protagonist when she was a child living in Victoria, and we'll go into some detail, but we want to look at a bunch of fringe information as well that impacted the whole world. So I'm expecting that a lot of people are going be a little bit familiar with the story, I mean, it was all over the place. The people involved and the story itself were, you know, we're talking Oprah, we're talking the Vatican, we're talking brought on as consultants for a lot of the bogus satanic panic trials that were held and investigations that were held in the 80s and 90s that locked people away for child abuse and sexual abuse without any hard evidence. Just a lot of paranoia and a lot of claims that there was wild underground satanic cult activity just engaged in really disturbing things.
Yeah. I mean, to really touch on that, it kind of like to me when we talked about this before and then reading on it, I was like, dude, this is the plot to either a really good docu-series that doesn't exist yet, and or a really good movie that doesn't exist yet. So just like putting that out there. Hopefully someone like hears this and reads the original article that we like and other things that we really like got the sources from, and it's like it's amazing. It's an amazing story. So just
yeah, and I feel like the effect of the story is known at this point, this many years later, a lot more than the actual story itself. That's partially why it interests me. But as you mentioned, Patrick, we've got some sources specifically that we're looking at, so that this is not the sort of thing that we've been looking at for a long time. We're by no means experts on the topic, and as always, our topics remain unexplained because there's not perfect answers, and we're never ever experts, and we're not purporting to be, and we're going to try to talk about things in a very conversational way, because that's our aim here, is to start a conversation. And a lot of people listening are going to know things that we don't. We want that. We want you to weigh in, correct us, share what you know. It's a learning opportunity for everybody. Comment sections email us. It's a big enough story that it could be something that we return to and cover everything we weren't able to properly cover.
definitely.
So that's a goal for sure. And not to mention, of course, that if you like the channel, if you like what you're hearing, go ahead and check it out further. Check out the other podcasts that are happening. Check out the website. Links in the description. But,
yep. Like, comment, subscribe. You know the vibes. That's how you do it. And I don't know. Yeah, just look for more of Paracon podcasts in the future. We have a lot of episodes coming out. I got something really interesting to bring for you guys involving possession, possibly ghosts. I don't really know, but we'll figure it out, guys. Well, to get back onto what we're talking here, this is like something that really gets driven into us, and you talk about this, and it's like everlasting paranoia, sensationalism, and like this whole rise of like what we're going to be talking about to like the modern day conspiracies and like satanic panics of today. Like we're dealing with things. So
I don't want anybody to get the impression that we're convinced that this story Michelle remembers was the genesis of these ideas or satanic panic as it kind of spread across the continent in the 80s or anything like that. It's always been a thing. It's always going to be a thing. It was just kind of the spark to a particularly intense flare of it, I guess. Like, it was a thing for a long time. Even in Victoria, it was a thing for a long time already.
I mean, we saw it in Salem, with the witch trials. Yeah. That's like primary example. That's probably it's not the origin of it, but you would see that's definitely like our like touch on it here in North America. That's like the first origins of it here in North America for sure.
Yeah, and I've always found it interesting how quickly it gets wrapped up in pop culture and entertainment. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, like before the story we're talking about, obviously, like movies, it was an interesting topic for people. Rosemary's Baby being a famous example. But specifically in Victoria, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about if you hear me offhand say Victoria's underground, I mean that both literally and figuratively, because Victoria is a city that is famous a little bit, at least in British Columbia, for having underground tunnel systems, whatever they were created for smuggling or just antiquated infrastructure that's been built on top of. It's a thing that exists in Victoria. It's, there's a homeless issue as well that ties into it, and there's to this day like entire zones of structures and buildings that have been abandoned for the better part of a half a century, waiting to be redeveloped. And there's a lot of undeveloped stuff there. And to tie it all back, there was a movie, the best example I can think of, there's probably a bunch that I came across, came out in 1935, called, I think, like Secrets of Chinatown, The Black Robe, or something like that, set specifically in Victoria, BC. And these underground tunnels and underground structures are used for, cult rituals and things like that. So it's been a part of the city for a long time.
Yeah, what got me when you brought that up was the homeless problem, because I'm just like imagining you going down there as a kid, or like teenager thinking, dude, let's go explore the tunnels.
100%. If I'd grown up in Victoria, I would be down there trying to check
run
it out.
into some like pale blind bum who's lived his whole life under the fucking tunnels, and it's like clicking echolocation to like eat people and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. There's some weird shit going down there. there's some like blind pale mutant fucking homeless babies being born or some shit. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, that would definitely. It's just like thinking about the fact that there are people living in those tunnels. I'm like, no. I'm good.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it's compelling enough that there's we'll hear some more stories as we go, but there's enough on the side of sensationalism and enough on the side of honest sounding testimony that doesn't have a full foot in the realm of plausibility, but it's can't entirely discredit. Like, there's some compelling stuff.
Yeah, and another thing is touching on like the modern day satanic panic that we're seeing. It's like primary example is examples like QAnon and conspiracy, like things like that,
Pizzagate and all that.
Yeah, and it's like it's like QAnon may sound like something that could have only been birthed in like darker corners of the internet, but goes back like way before even the internet itself. And it's like, sadly, it's like we can't just talk about it. It's going to be a divisive topic. It's going to get people riled up just even bringing this up. But we're willing to like know that we're not going to just be diving in, like ripping and raving on people of any belief at all. Even Satanist, hey, Satanist, yeah, we're chill. You know what I mean?
What you're doing, people.
Yeah, just don't kill cats. I heard that was a thing. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, the vibes, guys. We're chill. But realistically, it's like knowing that movement, like believing so heavily in something like that, you had written here like it's destroyed families, and
Oh yeah.
sent numerous innocent men and women to prison. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah. To be perfectly clear, like this wouldn't be interesting enough to talk about, I don't think, if when we said satanic panic, we meant that, um, all the little old biddies were protesting against rock and roll and blaming goth teens for this and that. It's not what we mean when we say panic. We mean, you know, it gets the better part of media and society embroiled, and all of a sudden, law enforcement, and all of a sudden, um, dozens of people are being, locked away on accusations that they're part of, um, satanic rings that, um, abuse children and things like this without any evidence, and it's all very cloudy, and it's easy to look back on, and see how ridiculous it sounds, this far in the future, things that happened in the 80s and 90s. But there was some serious law enforcement decisions made on very little grounds. And that's the kind of panic I want to
I mean, yeah, that's
talk about.
insane to think about because it happens today. You hear like things about like insert government official's name, like is a satanic child rapist and
Hmm.
drinks baby's blood or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, do I believe that? I don't know. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, it's like they're definitely. Oh, it's a weird thing. I remember watching like a documentary on that and being like, it was definitely some QAnon documentary, not like about QAnon. It was like funded by QAnon type stuff. So I was like, when I was watching, I was like, uh, what? But a lot of the things that are talked about, like you would definitely think like it leads people to do violent stuff. Like that's why you got the situation like Pizzagate, who, a guy
Yeah.
was convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to be at this pizza place with someone else, I guess, and
Some
he
sort
was,
of basement facility or something, wasn't
yeah,
it?
where they were about to sacrifice a kid, and it was like, I need to go save these kids. And
And
I don't know. There's a movie. A funny thing is that Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker. They made this big, like, huge thing about like sensationalizing and like romanticizing incels, which I felt like
mhm.
was a very unfair statement. Like, because I think there are a lot of people like who his character portrayed that are like definitely rejected by society, and we just kind of have to say they're like fuck them. It's kind of like
Kind
I
of,
don't.
yeah. That could very easily be the topic of
Yeah,
its own episode, though, because I mean, like, I feel like the people who
yeah. You could get
identify with the Joker as an
right.
incel aren't watching the movie properly. He's seriously riddled with mental illness. It's
No,
not,
100%.
it's not the same thing.
No, 100%. And but I actually think like that is the difference. It's like like we're looking at this objectively from the mindset of people who aren't like riddled with like serious mental illness, at least not like that bad, right? Like I might have anxiety and depression sometimes, but like bro, I ain't fucking like fantasizing about my neighbor like wanting to fuck, and then like next thing you know I'm like in her kitchen and she's like got the fucking knife in her hand. Like I'd be like, what the fuck would that when he
Yeah,
like
bit
that
of a
whole
bit of
thing.
a leap.
Bit of a leap, right? So it goes on. You look like we lost your video there, Cal.
Oh yeah, I don't know why. Can you still hear me though?
Yeah, I can definitely still hear you. So yeah, okay, there we
There we
go.
go. Not sure
But
what
to
happened.
really circle back onto it, it just like kind of shows you like the where people who are watching that movie are like coming from a place of like mental illness. Like, yeah, they're watching it from a misconstrued point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they relate to him for being an incel because like of their deluded reasons. But really, like we see him and we see all those people as like people who probably do suffer from mental illness. Like there's got to be a reason why these guys like cannot get women, like, and it's like involuntary celibacy. So it's like the idea that men are out here living a life. It's kind of funny. I was just in a comment section and I made a joke about a character on the Umbrella Academy, and I'm not going to mention it, but I made a joke and someone was like, they really went at me because I like attacked this person, and I'm just like, yeah, a character. Well, I attacked the actor. Okay, but
okay,
whatever. I'm like, I made this comment and people are like, yeah, you're probably an incel. You don't get to like interact with humans that much. And I was like, it's really funny because like I actually do interact with people all the time. Like I have my girlfriend, I have like a family, I have like tons of friends who like I go out to the club with like every weekend and stuff, and we hang out and socialize. But you know, I make one comment that could be seen and like coming out of the mouth of an incel person, and I instantly got like, oh man, that's why your name on Instagram is like this. And I was just like, you know, you are the people who make guys like who you're describing want to go shoot up a movie theater. Like it's really sad. Like it's just like this polarizing thing because it's like we're supposed to not want to like have that kind of thing happen, yet we demonize those kind of people like before they even do it. And it like drives this like perpetuating thing in society. And it's like those guys fuel the fear in themselves too with this like, hey, you know, there's the satanic thing going on down at the thing. And then it's like, oh my God, I need to save those people because they're so reclusive from society that they feel like this is their way to make a name for themselves. Even if they think they're being a hero, they're not, you know. It's really weird, but yeah, that's a yeah, like you said, it's a slippery slope, man. That topic is like, oh God, dude. But you know, it has to be like addressed because that is like that's the
still
biggest thing.
Yeah.
It's still a thing. It's a modern day. You hear about it. I work with people like literally not even like 6 months ago. The manager to this bar that I worked at was like talking to someone, and I heard QAnon, and I turned over and she's like dangling her earrings and flipping them, and they're big Qs. And I look and she has a huge QAnon hoodie. And yeah, this like manager to a bar, like really popular bar in my town. I'm not going to say the name, but they like, yeah, that place, like the manager is a flagrant QAnon member, like out in the open type about it. And it's like, they're not vaccinated. You know, none of the staff members were like required to wear masks. I was like the only dude working there who had like a license to like be a security guard. Like it was just like, but you know, they're all like these hardcore Trumpy, like, you know, QAnon member type people. And it's like, we're talking about Jay-Z. Like, yeah, there's a Jay-Z song, Jay-Z and Beyonce, and it's like something about like, oh yeah, all I want in this life of sin is me and my girlfriend. And she's all like, yeah, you know, they sold their souls, and like was really trying to convince me like they sold their souls to the devil, and like Jay-Z and Beyonce are Satanists, they eat baby's blood. I'm like, it's weird that you think these like two, like, you know, just gonna say it, these two black people who like really came from nothing, like, you know, they just came and built themselves off their talent alone in their own respective communities. Like Beyonce's from Houston, Jay-Z's from New York, and they built themselves up, and then they met each other, and like now you think since they're two rich and famous celebrities they sold their souls to the devil. Like it was like really weird. But
yeah,
trying to convince me that like these artists that I listen to, she even said Blake Shelton the guy who's with Gwen Stefani sold his soul to the devil, and Miranda Lambert wouldn't do it, and that's why they split up. And I'm all like, that's not what she said in the song that she wrote. I don't listen to country music, guys. Just gonna put that out there. But
it's one of those things that's like, I couldn't. It's hard to think of something less, less compelling that you could pick apart about somebody else. Like, it doesn't say you believed in that.
Yeah, everything about this. Yeah, and most of the time, everything about these people who get accused of being Satanists, like, are either A, like, non-secular religious people. Like, they're not maybe those, like, typical religious people, I guess, and they might be, like, an alternative type, I don't know. And it's just, like, they could get pointed out, like, just because they've never been seen, like, praising God on a tweet, or just because they've never been seen, like, in a thing that promotes Jesus, they're, like, now seen, like, as a devil worshiper. And also, it's a lot of, like, Jewish, like, actors and celebrities get accused of being, like, Satanists, and it's kind of like, that's another weird thing, because it's like, these people, just because they don't fit this, like, Christian ideology, they're instantly, like, Satanist, like, and that's what fuels that, like, whole thing, because it's just, like, one ideology versus the other. And like you said, it's the hardest thing, and probably the most, like, farthest thing that you could try to pick out of someone's life and say they're that. Like, Hillary Clinton's a Satanist. What about Hillary Clinton? Literally, sorry, but what about her says Satanist at all, besides her weirdly demonic face? Okay. I'm kidding. But it's just like, I don't know. It's like, what? Like, none of these people literally exude, like, satanic qualities, but in the media, they're going to be, like, shouted out that, not in the media, but retract that. The people in these conspiracy circles, like, such as QAnon, like, that feel this satanic panic within their own inner circles, really. They don't, like, really exit out into the public that much.
Yeah, it's hard to convert people to that sort of thing.
Yeah, like, you'll have that one coworker who looks at you, and it's like, you'll bring up one person, and they'll be like, oh, dude, let me say something about them. And you're like, oh. But then again, it's just all about where you're at in life and who you're around, Sometimes you might be in a community where you're never going to hear a guy, like, openly oust, like, a politician as, like, being someone like that, or a celebrity, just because you don't live around those kind of that minded of people, But really, we digress, honestly.
A little bit, yeah. That's a lot. Yeah. That's a good snapshot of some of the things going on today, what the climate's like a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's bounce back.
Let's talk about the plot. Let's bounce
back about 41 years. Go to 1980, when Michelle Remembers was published. And Michelle, if you hear us say a couple different names throughout this, it's because her birth name was Michelle Smith. She married and took the name Michelle Proby during the time that she was undergoing therapy, and all these things were happening mainly. And she married again in the aftermath and took on the name Pastor, but we'll get to all those things. So long story short, in the 70s, Michelle Proby has a miscarriage. In quick succession, she has a miscarriage. She starts having horrific nightmares, and she starts seeing this therapist about it. And what ends up happening is they start using hypnosis therapy. And while in a hypnotized state, she begins to unlock supposedly repressed memories from when she was a child in the 1950s in Victoria. And I think I read that there was over 600 hours of recorded memories, just her kind of inhabiting her child self with access to these memories that she hasn't had access to for so long, over 20 years.
And just to put that out real quick, sorry to interrupt you. The name of that psychiatrist, his name is Lawrence Pastor.
Right. We'll hear his name a lot. I
just wanted to put that out.
Arguably as big of a player in all this as Michelle is. It's what all of her memories encompassed. Why this is such a big issue is she claimed that members of her immediate community, including members of her family, were involved in this underground satanic cult that engaged in really horrific ritual practices, right down to murder, torture, abduction, molestation, grave desecration, you name it. And the cherry on top is that she claims that she was abducted from her childhood home and held captive in this specific house that she describes in Victoria, and forced to participate in this really gruesome rituals that at their peak involved her being forced to eat human remains and being like literally buried with body parts from deceased babies and things like this. So it goes and goes, and we don't need to get into the nitty gritty, but just the sorts of awful stuff that you can imagine, whatever it may be, probably in there somewhere. And
I think I have a list actually right here. If you
yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Actually, continue.
Yeah, we could probably make an episode about just that. But I mean, that's what the book's for. We don't need to pick apart the book. We're interested in Victoria primarily, and anybody could go and pick out this book. Interestingly, it's been more or less debunked now, spoiler, but interestingly, the book is out of print despite its global overnight phenomena status in the early 80s, and kind of hard to find. We'll touch on that a bit later, but what ended up happening with all these recordings and these memories, them both being religious, Catholic, I believe, is deeply disturbing revelation, to uncover these memories, which they both completely believed in. And what they did was they documented it all, and they published the narrative, and garnered just insane acclaim, and they became very controversial celebrities as a result of this story. To really root it down, what we're interested in, the geography, let's say. So her home, 2078 Newton Street, is specifically described with an address there. That's not the place that we're interested in. There is this house that she describes that she was being held in, this house that this cult is gathering in to perform all these rituals, and it connected to the Victoria Underground. And she wasn't able to describe it with precision in terms of an address or its location within the city or anything like that. But she was able to describe it well enough that people think they know which house it is in Victoria, or which property it is based on her descriptions.
As like a little local legend type thing.
Exactly, yeah. Definitely fueling, I don't know if you could call it a fire at this point in 1980 of Victoria's reputation for this, but it definitely improved upon what was already there. And they became quite wealthy also as a result of this. So I understand that there was a $100,000 advance. And that's a lot of money in 1980. And it would almost triple that, I think, in returns. So up to something like more than $1 million today.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it says right here they would earn another $242,000 in paperback rights and royalties, which is worth more than $1 million. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of money for them back then, definitely, for what you could do with that much money, back in the 80s. And also, I did a little research. It looks like you could find the book on thriftbooks.com for about like $50 if anyone's actually interested in doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's really interesting though, because I mean, like, it's out of print. Sure, nobody wants to print it because of the controversy involved with its now debunked status. But even used copies of like a dingy old paperback that, everybody's neighbor had a copy of 30 years ago, now going for $50 used is interesting.
Yeah.
To me, that it's like this, not coveted thing, but it's like a collectible almost.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's worth money, outside of it. I wonder if they probably don't get checks from it anymore, but, and it's another thing is looking at how much money they made off of that. And at first, like it says, the events like that she remembered, like, were just completely messed up. And I think you talked about Freud, like when he first started out developing hypnosis therapy, like this was something that a lot of people experienced as well. Like,
yeah. And there was some work done because of how big of a deal it was to, compare and contrast, and hypnosis therapy and memory recovery and things like this aren't really accredited anymore as treatment methods for this sort of thing, and the results certainly aren't taken as gospel, pun intended. But it's the sort of thing that was already a little bit understood to be something we should be wary of. Freud having done similar types of treatment on women with some sort of trauma in their past, and they would unearth these crazy memories, which very interestingly often revolved around secret satanic visitation or cult activity or cannibalism, all things which definitely play into this story, which is interesting. And we'll see that not long after this book exploded onto the scene, a lot of very similar stories and cases started popping up, and it all kind of muddies the water. It is to say that we don't know if it's just like a copycat sort of a virus, conscious or subconscious, doesn't matter. But is it a form of emulation, or is it, is it a similar symptom to the same issue? Like, is there a reason why these same sorts of memories are supposedly being uncovered? Because it's pretty specific, pretty oddball coincidence, I would say.
yeah.
But we'll go into a little bit more detail as we go. I don't think we need to go into too much detail regarding the nature of some of the gruesome things she remembers, people being clubbed, and she names a ringleader and all sorts of deeds that were carried out, and certain places where things were carried out, but primarily the house that she describes is what we're interested in.
Said right here, I believe. At first, the events that Kirby remembered were merely horrific. She began to remember some kind of orgiastic party at a home in the Victoria neighborhood where guests clubbed a woman to death. She remembered an evil man named Malachi.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Seems like a whole, just like really dramatic, and bizarre story in general. It's just.
Yeah, my impression is that it gets wilder and more bizarre and more graphic and more violent as it goes on. And obviously they can't fit 600 hours of recordings into a paperback.
Right.
But I guess they made as much of a narrative out of it as they could for the sake of this book. But I'm sure there was a lot of really wild things that they left out just because they were repetitive or redundant, or they didn't work with the narrative they were trying to build. Things like that. But that's kind of why I mentioned before, like, if you can think of it, it was probably in there, and we don't really need to try to unpack or understand what she supposedly remembered.
Yeah, I just had to say, felt like, there are going to definitely be some people watching it. I definitely can say that, man. We want to hear it.
Yeah, exactly.
We want to know the gruesome details, but yeah, just to give you guys a real good idea, it's not family friendly. All right.
Not that we've ever, really aimed for.
Claimed, we never claimed to be. I don't think kids. Don't waste your time on conspiracy theories. Go play outside.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't add to the unexplained nature of the story to detail, her being placed in an open grave while a woman in a black robe chants above her, and there's cats in the distance mewing and licking her and being thrown on her.
I kind of actually did want to touch that right there. Let me see, where was that? Oh, yeah. She describes rituals performed at night at the city's historic Ross Bay Cemetery, which, I felt like shout out to Ross Bay Cemetery. Being placed in an open grave while crying, cat kneeled, and a woman dressed in a dark robe chanted above her. She remembered a bizarre ritual of rebirth in a nearby mausoleum. Her tormentors hissing and dancing like cats while one of them licked her. I was like, hey.
Yeah, that's messed up. She's 5 at this point.
Oh. Okay, no, yeah, that's a horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually that's messed up. In my mind, I'm imagining her as a grown woman.
No, yeah. Yeah, okay. Important to remember. She's seeing her therapist. She's a grown woman. She is in her late 20s, I believe, or mid 20s. But the memories that she repressed are from the 50s when she was very young, 5 years old.
That actually makes this so much worse. The place where, I don't know, how I was imagining it in my head was so different. But now I'm actually oh, okay, now this makes it so much worse. Yeah, okay. And it is, okay, no, it makes sense because it says, in a hypnotic trance, she began to recount long forgotten events in a childlike voice, her 5-year-old self. Okay, yeah, that.
Spooky stuff. It's very much the stuff of horror movies.
It definitely is, that's why I was actually a psychology major in college, and I stopped being that because I was just don't want to deal with people like that. You know what I mean? Sorry. And it's so funny because everyone I know who's in college essentially is a psychology major, and it just happens to work out like that. Except for you, man. You're the first creative writing major guy that I've met. I was like, wow, not a lot of people go for an English major of any kind,
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think we've talked about that, but I knew what I was getting into. I knew it wouldn't lead to career opportunities. I did it for me.
Yourself.
I wanted to develop those skills.
That's what's up, man. And kids, follow your dreams. All right,
Follow your dreams. Yeah.
that's the moral of the story. Not this one, actually.
Are you kidding, man? Yeah.
back
don't
back
follow
to
your dreams.
Satanic Panic.
Pretty much. Yeah, as you can imagine, them both being super religious, religious officials are being brought in, including like priests, to try to manage the situation and like, perform blessings and things like that. And they eventually are taken to the Vatican to meet with a cardinal, I believe.
Yeah.
And, I think there's interviews with him on the matter and everything. That's pretty interesting stuff, but important, I guess, to note that everybody takes it seriously. Also important to note that presently nobody takes it seriously. It's for the most part considered to be debunked for a number of reasons. Primarily, a lot of the like when she does drill down into very detailed accounts of things in the story, a lot of those details then give people what they need to disprove and to go into historical record and see that and know there's no evidence of such and such a car crash on such and such a highway at the time that the book indicates, and such a mausoleum isn't big enough to contain that many people, and it goes on and on. Like her family doesn't corroborate any of the story. There's no record of her like being absent from school during any of this time.
When your family doesn't back up the story,
yeah,
that's that. I mean, that's it. Like it's over.
That's pretty much it, and that I don't think that makes it less interesting though, considering that almost everybody involved, because she was on the convention circuit for a long time. They were consultants on like federal investigations of all sorts of satanic panic cases, and like they were regarded for a long time as authorities, and this story was believed, and everybody at the very least believed that they believed it. And as soon as you start getting into like memories that were repressed when you were 5 years old, like nobody can really say like, oh, you got that wrong, so it couldn't have happened. It's like I don't even know if I have any memories from when I was 5 years old. Like I couldn't recall anything in detail if I had a gun to my head. So it's take it or leave it, really, and her family not backing any of it up is pretty damning, again, pun intended. But it's just interesting that these hypnotic therapy sessions bring out similar stories in people in similar places in their lives, and her story, this spark, led to so many similar stories, most of which people have the same opinion of, and that's that they, at the very least, believe that the people involved believe them. So
And
it's
I don't
sort of
I don't know how much that validates it, though. You know what I mean? It's kind of like funny.
Oh no, it doesn't validate it. It just makes it interesting.
Yeah, it's like I would be like, Chief, why did we listen to these guys? Hey, they believe it. That's all that matters. All right.
Yeah.
And you're like,
a leap of faith.
Yeah. You're really like, what?
Yeah, it's a testament really to Pazder, the therapist, his social standing, I would say, and his influence and his credibility, because he was a very serious person and very highly regarded in his field, and not known to be one for writing stories or money making schemes or anything like this. And when he was used as a consultant and an authority on similar cases, he was said to have been extremely skeptical of almost every story, and he took everything very seriously. So
that's very good to know. Honestly, Yeah, that's actually something that I like question too, because who is the real culprit here? Like, is there someone at fault, or do you think it's actually just a side effect? And that also speaks to really to just go back onto the topic of hypnotherapy as a subject in general. Um, why are people of these like of this demographic in general, like women, um, who can afford to go see therapists, hypnotherapists, go see these hypnotherapists and then experience the same experience? And it's not to say that every woman who has gone and like done that experiences that, but I'm just curious, like, is that a side
What's
effect to
yeah, what's the
hypnotherapy?
cause? Yeah, it's well, I mean, we don't nothing that we're looking at for sources is scientific in nature. We don't have any quote unquote data to look at or to try to speculate with. But I guess that's kind of the suggestion is that um, what can account for the coincidence there, other than just zeitgeist, like societally clung to fears, like pop culture and common lore, common stories, common fears. I don't know, but it's the details that are weird and how similar they are.
Yeah,
Um,
so to really touch back on what we're saying, the influence and credibility of the people, and talking about Pastor, being like an accredited psychologist from the Universities of Alberta School of Medicine, University of Liverpool and McGill, in addition being a
yes,
fellow
several.
of
Yeah.
yeah, fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and surgeons and a staff member of local hospitals. Pastor was also deeply religious, and was likely no coincidence that Proby's recollections that came starkly confirm his own faith.
Yeah.
So
So it doesn't seem like the kind of person that would just at that stage in his career um, toss it all away for something that he didn't believe in.
yeah,
And
definitely.
it's worth noting that there's been studies since widely discrediting the use of hypnotherapy in this sort of a setting as treatment. Um,
In a religious setting.
no, in like a psychoanalytic or a
Interesting.
therapeutic sort of a setting.
Interesting.
Yeah, just because the results are completely haywire. Like, what can you even garner from?
And honestly, when you're a hypnotherapist, you're like, I believe you're just driven by like an internal bias on how you think people should be. Like I don't know, like there
Maybe.
isn't. I don't know, like a traditional behavioral therapist, is like kind of supposed to like meet people where they're at and not like necessarily like have an end goal for anyone. It's kind of like, let's just like meet you where you're at and just like see where we can go from here together, like, and build. At least that's what I've like garnered from my experience in traditional therapy and also going to school for it. So I felt like there's this like basis of like what one thing that you have to like worry about is like your inherent biases.
Mhm.
And that's something that I felt like, man, people who are hypnotherapists, like that's probably the scariest thing, because you're like just gotta trust that this guy like doesn't want to change you to be like some type of like neo-Nazi. I don't know. Like he could do like have some, he or she. I'm not saying that. I don't know. Like, why I'm gendering this hypnotherapist hypothetical as a guy, but realistically speaking, you just got to worry about people's like inherent biases in any situation. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, that brings up a really good point when we're talking about just how professional and well read he was, because we have to assume that he would have known about Freud's studies and would have had those in mind when he's using hypnosis therapy on her and getting these sorts of memories out of her, or maybe even contributing to the retrieval of these sorts of memories, because we'll kind of hear that in the ensuing satanic panic, a lot of testimony from kids and stuff was kind of baited out of them, and then that was used as the only real evidence to lock people away. But certainly, like, he might not have been aware of false memories, but he would have been aware of the similarities with Freud, and just the risks of what hypnosis does, like reduces inhibition, and they're already having these super emotional sessions, and like fantasies in that state can kind of start to look like memory, I guess.
Yeah.
But to go into details specifically, there's one specific study that is just wildly similar. So Freud puts 18 female patients into hypnosis at one point. They were all emotionally troubled and had come to him, and he supposed that through hypnosis he might be able to extract subconscious memories of sexual abuse and restore their memory, restore their mental health, and allow them to start processing these things. But what he found was that under hypnosis, the things that these women were able to recall were not merely sexual in nature, but frequently of cannibalism and the appearance of the devil and cultish things, which really smacks of Michelle remembers. And I think this would have been apparent at the time of these therapy sessions. Just saying. And it's worth noting, of course, I don't know if we've mentioned it just yet, but they ended up marrying, Pazder and Michelle. She took his name. They left their spouses that they had when they started these sessions together, and they ended up as partners in this.
That wasn't a result of
shared fame. Yeah,
right.
It's pretty weird. Like, he was super successful and super well liked and well accredited. He leaves his wife and 4 children.
4 kids.
Yeah.
They must have been ugly little annoying kids.
maybe.
It's the only reason to leave your kids, guys.
It's it's really wild. Now we don't need to go into the details of her story anymore, but it's hard to say whether it inspired or cleared the way for, or made people feel safe to come forward. But there was, in the ensuing decade, a lot of reported cases of alleged satanic ritual abuse across Canada and the United States. And it was found that they often fell into a couple different categories. Some were very similar to Michelle's story. So usually adult women who were pretty successful, stable lives, who sought therapists, and they would uncover these traumatic memories of cult-driven sexual abuse through hypnosis. So it's like, it's a chicken or the egg situation. It's really interesting, I think.
Essentially, you believe, not believe, but you're saying that we don't know whether there was already satanic sexual abuse going on in Victoria, BC beforehand, like in the 50s when she mentions, or is it all kind of like being inspired like by the mentioning of it now that it's been brought to the attention to these people's mind?
Right. Or at the very least, what's causing people to not advertise, but publicize the fact that they're recovering these sorts of memories? Like, is it just a trend in the publicization of it, or is it a trend in it happening altogether? Because it's the Freud instance kind of illuminates that it's just a thing that happens. It's not time specific. It's not trend specific.
I think there's always going to be a trend, essentially, when one thing happens along those lines. Like, we know, like, what sells is, like, sex sells and fear, like, sells, essentially. It's like, you can, like, scare your audience, and if you can, like, sensationalize something that scares people, like, you know, anything about, like, if there was an article that said, like, terrorist attack imminent tomorrow and, like, insert city name, it would be like, people would be freaking out, and everyone would be buying that magazine and newspaper to know, like, what
Sure. Yeah.
like, what is it? Like, everyone would be clicking on it, and the clicks make money, so it's like, it's all about selling, something. So essentially they know, like, oh man, if there is this, like, trend in satanic ritualistic abuse, it's really weird, like, but it's just the facts that people are like that. It's human nature, almost, in a sad way.
Yeah, I think what makes this case particularly interesting is the sorts of cases that it led to weren't always of the same type or same sort. Like I mentioned, that there are a couple different categories. Like, they weren't all just suppressed abuse, memories, false memories or not, but
some of them are actual, like, real.
Yeah, like small communities just being, like, plunged into hysteria. Like, there's a famous account of a city in Saskatchewan, which is one of the prairie provinces here in Canada, called Martinsville. And I guess more than a dozen people were criminally charged in the 90s for, they were linked by association to a non-existent devil church that was reported to have been abducting children. But this is just one example. There's no actual evidence that was ever provided. It's all testimony and just association, which is just it's kind of bonkers. The craziest ones that people might remember were usually called the daycare cases, because I guess there was a lot of daycares shut down in the late 80s, early 90s. I could name some of them. There was Little Rascals Daycare was apparently one of them in North Carolina, Oak Hill in Texas, We Care in New Jersey, Fells Acres in Massachusetts, Country Walk in Florida, the Bronx Five. That's just in the United States. There's a huge list of these allegations that ended up putting a lot of people behind bars that there wasn't ever really evidence for, that are now really being criticized in terms of law enforcement.
I heard the same thing, very similar, actually, and very close to my house. There was a situation where we hear, and I heard this from a family member who is actually, like, in the government and, like, has, like, government clearances, like security clearances of, like, pretty high level, but they did some, like, looking into child protective services of, like, my county, and they ended up, like, telling me that there's, like, these allegations of, like, child sex trafficking and, like, child abuse and all this stuff going on where like people are essentially like, and it like leads back to these like satanic cults. And I was just
exactly
like,
it.
yeah, and I'm like, I look into it, I can't find anything on the internet about it, right? But this is coming from someone who like I really know to have access to like this kind of stuff. Like they worked on, you know, real like government stuff. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, kind of weird to hear like someone say like, you know, because at the time actually I was a little kid. I was not a little kid, but I was 16, and my family like was, my little siblings were going into foster care and stuff, and like my family member like told me about it, and it was like this whole thing about, even though I had a choice not to go into foster care at the time, they were like, you should go in to protect your little siblings because I've heard some things. And that's like, how much of this is a sensationalized, like, yeah, satanic panic type thing? Because I'm not, you can look up the internet on it and it's like nothing shows up. Like there is no like federal case or like official federal investigation on it. But, you know, there are like official federal like government employees who like have like talked about it and said, yeah, we know, like we've heard some things through the grapevine about it. And it's like, say that is sounds like satanic panic type vibes.
Yeah, I kind of reading about it in hindsight makes me wish, you know, I could have been, you know, really old enough to understand and like pay attention to the news in the early '90s or even the late '80s, and like just to hear what it sounded like, the news reports. I kind of want to read it in the voice of one of my sources here that I'm gonna shout out later, but they put it perfectly. These cases, these daycare cases, usually began with an allegation of sexual abuse against a child that, during the course of investigation, snowballed to include more and more children and staff members. In police interviews, scores of very young children would allege supernormal acts of mass sexual abuse, orgies, sex trafficking, masks, rituals, and blood sacrifices. Many of these cases led to years-long trials. While most produced acquittals, some of them did end up with convictions. And the common feature of all of them is a failure of due process, total absence of corroboration and physical evidence. And it's pretty looked down upon now, because a lot of study has been put into this idea of and some of these cases were used specifically, this idea of already having an idea of the crime you're trying to get a testimony out of the child regarding, and kind of pressuring them to answer in a certain way. And you know, you can imagine easily what the outcome would be if one adult was interrogating another adult, but you know, they're kids. So some studies been put into it that's put a lot of bad looking on these cases, and a lot of innocent people around the world. It's nothing to laugh about. Face decades-long prison sentences.
Yeah.
As a result of satanic hysteria.
And some of the things that these people get accused for, if it is like involving anything with sexual abuse of children, like you go to prison for that, like it's bad, you know what I mean? Like no one like takes pity on that, innocent or not. Like if that's what's on your paperwork, you're done for, you know, period. So it's like, it's really bad. It's just a sad like situation if real innocent people actually went to prison for this like thing and faced like horrible, heinous like allegations against them, like, and then were actually convicted for it. Like that, dude, that ruins people's lives to the fullest, because there's just no, then even after you're out of prison, it's knocking on your neighbor's doors, and you could look like the nicest guy, but if you have to say, hey, I'm freaking Johnny, And I said, yes, Papa. And no, it's bad. It's like, have to say that to people is like, no.
Yeah, I've got, I don't know if we need to go into it, but I've got like a list of names here. Like, in Texas, there's a couple of daycare operators spent more than 21 years in prison on baseless charges that they subjected children to rituals involving dismembered babies and grave desecration. There's never any evidence provided for any of that.
Yeah, it's always different in different states. I know in like in the South, it seems like in Texas and in Florida, like those like kind of people seem to live like a lot longer in prison compared to like California. It's like because in California, you kind of like as soon as you go to prison for no matter like what it is, you're instantly divided by your race, and then it's like instantly having to go into your like once you're in your race, they like ask you for your paperwork, and you have to like go to this person, like an actual prison guard, like processor, ask for your like your charges, like your rap sheet, and then you have to give it to that guy, like to the guys, and like have them read your rap sheet. And if it's like anything on your rap sheet that involves like abusing a woman, like rape, child abuse, child like molestation, anything like that, or snitching, like if there's snitching on your paperwork or anything like, yeah, you're gonna get like literally killed. It's just like, yeah, it's just like messed up. Or they'll just like they'll try to get you, but you most of the time, if that's on your paperwork, people go into protective custody like right off the bat, and they just like don't even try to be around normal people in prison. Well, there's no normal people in prison, but you know what I mean. Like they don't go into general population because, yeah, you'll just get stabbed. It's just horrible. Like no one wants to get stabbed with like a shiv that got transported via someone's butt.
Well, any shiv really, but yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of California, do you know Manhattan Beach?
I think I've heard of it.
Because there's a supposedly the most famous example of the daycare cases is McMartin Preschool, which is in Manhattan Beach, and apparently this case ended up involving more than 350 children, and included among the allegations, supposedly, this is the way the case went, that children were ferried around town using secret tunnels beneath the daycare. And there were no tunnels beneath the daycare, but nevertheless, the case lasted 7 years, and there was no convictions. So it's just like, it's nuts. And this is the case, and there's actual transcripts here. I don't know if I want to read them because it's a little bit disturbing.
Yeah.
Of the interview process where, you know, these specialists and therapists that are interrogating these kids are using questionable techniques and just kind of not allowing them to say no when asked questions. Like they'll get a straight no from a kid when asking a question, and then they'll kind of cast doubt on whether or not that no was truthful and ask again and again and again and stop when they get a yes, sort of thing. Like the term witch hunt has never been more accurately applied, besides the witch hunts. It's really disturbing.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because in modern day society, it's like the people claiming in the media, claiming witch hunt, are people usually of a demographic that we're seeing like carrying out the witch hunts. You know what I mean? Like orchestrating the witch hunts. We're like usually from a conservative Christian community that felt like their beliefs and their values were under attack by Satan himself. So they were willing to do anything and everything to protect their family from the devil. So they'll burn this girl at the stake or they'll send this doctor to prison. You know what I mean? Like, it's just send these innocent daycare workers to prison because it fits their like background. But then it's like the minute they get caught for like, you know, grabbing a girl's boob without consent, it's like this is a witch hunt.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
Of everybody, just in this kind of decade that we're looking at, 15 years, let's say, if every claim, hypothetically, if every claim were based on, you know, actual occurrences, then there are tens of thousands of bodies every year that are not showing up, and no remains of animals or fetuses or tunnels or, you know, destroyed graves, or, you know, like there's never anything. Like, there's never any, like, for every, we're just beating a dead horse at this point, but for every accusation that pans something out, there is 1,000 that don't, and yet it's still, you know, put on this big pedestal as, you know, something to fear and watch out for and hunt down, you know, no matter how it seems.
That's just the way it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's at this point too, I want to tie it back to Michelle Remembers and read another really good quote here from the source I'm going to shout out later. But it reads here, just to kind of establish that we're not deliberately trying to make it ambiguous whether or not there was any story behind the recovered memories. But by the mid-90s, more academic research was poking at the underlying assumptions of repressed memory. There's a 1996 study which concluded that a minimum of 70% of abuse allegations obtained under hypnosis had no basis in reality, even when the memories weren't explicitly satanic. And a comprehensive 1997 essay in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology called for an audit into the failures of psychotherapy that had allowed satanic panic to spread. A 1997 survey out of the UK tracked the human toll of false accusations obtained under hypnosis, saying that it caused health declines, job losses, and even the permanent loss of children to those struck by it. There's another study in 93 that which linked false repressed memories not only to satanic panic as a phenomenon, but to other things like accounts of alien abductions and past lives, reincarnation. And it basically boils down to people fantasizing entire complex scenarios and defining those fantasies as memories. So it's a area of study. It's an entire area of study that we're just touching on because of this one book that became a phenomenon and seems to have inspired dozens of, we can't call them copycats because I'm sure a lot of them were genuine in their belief, but a lot of similar cases which grew this sort of climate that inspired this witch hunt, and all of a sudden it was, you know, a huge pan-continental thing ruining people's lives over things there's no evidence for. It's disturbing.
Yeah, definitely. It is disturbing. I mean, when you realize what like the satanic panic is, and it's not like real people getting like, I mean, it's not real people getting like they're not getting murdered. They're not getting, because when you hear it, you kind of think like, oh gosh, that sounds like a whole bunch of Satanists killing people. But then you realize it's actually a whole bunch of people getting accused of being Satanists and being accused of doing these horrible things, having these allegations brought upon them, and ending up like in prison for most of their life.
Yeah, I think it's really distracting when something like a belief system gets brought into it, or when children are brought into it, and it's people take accusations, extremely seriously. And, as you just said, it's shocking to hear something like that. There's these Satanist extremists killing people. And I think people, when they hear that, are instinctively more interested in the fact that they're Satanists or that the victims were children than they are in, the fact that, kill should be the operative word that they're concerned by. Like, somebody's dead, there's a body, but there's never a body. So it's like, I don't know. It's muddying, really. And let's well, that does a pretty good job of establishing Michelle Remembers and its legacy, if we want to call it that.
Yeah.
But what originally drew me to the story is the fact that it all took place in Victoria, specifically, this place that already has such a reputation, and then it kind of fans out and starts affecting all these other places that maybe don't have any reputation. But starting in Victoria is very interesting to me because of the underground tunnel systems and the lore that already exists about the ritual cult use of them. And there's a big community. Like, one of my sources that I ended up doing a lot of forum reading on was Urban Exploration Resource, because it is a legitimate hobby to go exploring the underbelly of cities and urban areas. It's pretty interesting, and there's a lot of that in Victoria. And it's not a secret thing; it's just a feature of Victoria. And there's a lot to go off. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of photography. There's a lot of space underground, and it's interesting that it's kind of been adopted as like a part of the tourism sector. Like, I ended up reading about businesses and tour guides and things kind of trying to capitalize on it, and they spread misinformation a little bit on just spooky goings-ons in the underground and unsolved cases and things like that. And cults using the tunnels for dubious things, crimes, possibly murders, possibly the sorts of stuff found in Michelle Remembers. But yeah, that's like nobody's doing any work really to try to mitigate like the satanic panic. It's growing. If anything, Victoria's like a hub for it.
Yeah.
I did want to point out something that I read. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's pretty interesting. That the Greater Victoria Public Library apparently has 2 copies of the book, and there are dozens upon dozens of holds placed on the title, resulting in the waiting list stretching years long. And there's this theory that the book is so hard to come by now, and that like holds are placed on it like artificially, and there's actually no copies of the book, and if you try to buy it, you won't actually end up getting it, and things like this.
Wow.
There's a weird conspiracy surrounding that. Worth noting, but I don't know if there's any credence to that.
Mm-hmm.
What I really want to talk about the best bit of intrigue here, and kind of what got me interested in all of this to begin with. We've basically just explained the story and explained why it's completely bogus, and explained why all the after effects are horrible, basically. But as we mentioned in the outset, there is a house that enthusiasts believe is the property vaguely described in the book, based on architecture, location, I guess carvings and things like that. There's cement pillars in this building, so it's never given an address in the book, but people figure that they know which house is being in Victoria is referred to by the story as the one she was taken to, and the one where the cult meets and performs these crazy activities. And why that's significant is because there's another case that took place in Victoria, which is very interesting, and it kind of meets up with Michelle's. There was a boy named Michael Dunahee, whose name might sound familiar to some people. It's a pretty high-profile missing persons case in Canada, but as a boy, he went missing from a playground, I believe, on specifically March 24th, 1991, which is significant because that marks the 25th anniversary to the day of the establishment of the official Church of Satan, and is also supposedly the quote-unquote Feast of the Beast that Michelle refers to, which is supposed to happen every 25 years. And that's what she was being held for, was this ritual. And of course, Michelle, Michael being variations of one name, being a biblical character, the archangel who cast out Lucifer, yada, yada, yada. But that's a pretty huge coincidence. This playground that he was taken from is, I guess, less than 2 blocks away from the house people think is the house from the story, on this 25th anniversary, almost like a prophecy sort of thing.
That is crazy. I mean,
a total cold case.
Yeah, something that could be totally theorized too, which would be really scary, is, like, if there's like political motivation to like have that going on and like to fuel satanic panic, because that like might bolster votes in this specific like party leaning like towards these specific values. It could definitely like be interesting, because I don't know, like the idea that a person who wasn't a satanic, like ritualistic person, like kidnapped that kid and, made it like knew the coincidence and knew the significance of the date, but knew that he was doing it to like fuel the fire, like would just be even almost worse than him getting kidnapped by an actual satanic cult. I don't know. Like, it's horrible that kid went missing in the first place, but the idea that it's like there are 2 possibilities essentially, and it's like one.
Yeah, what's worse, right? Like,
yeah, what's worse, him getting killed by the actual cult, or a guy like framing cults, like, or trying to make it look like, look, you're still not safe. The the Satanists are still out here.
Yeah, well, the awful thing to me is that there's obviously Satanists in Victoria. I don't know if there's record-setting numbers of them. It doesn't matter. Couldn't care less. Let them do as they please. But it's, whether it was this extremist cult or somebody trying to pin it on an extremist cult. It's like the same people take the blame, and the same people suffer either way.
Yeah.
It's weird to say that. I don't know if it makes a whole lot of difference. Like, whoever did it is evil either way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the underground tunnels that were supposed to connect to this house in that area, and these rituals, there's not a lot of specifics, which I think lends itself a lot to how interesting it is. There's a lot of like access points that are now inaccessible, or they've been caved in or sealed off or buried or built on top of, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like hard for anybody to even know what all is down there and how to access it all, if it can be accessed, what it's being used for. Because this is like a century ago, more than a century ago. Super interesting to me. But there's any number of urban tales. That's kind of what we have to go off of, and that's, I guess, what we're concerned with here. But if you wanted to go on something like the urban exploration sites, you can spend an evening for sure reading about people finding by chance weird tunnel accesses and getting lost and turned around and encountering creepy people and not being able to recall their directions perfectly and being in the dark, etc., etc.
Oh man, that sounds so shitty. It's like,
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, in terms of hard information, that's what we got. I mean, what do you think is the more likely outcome at this point, given the stories that we were able to outline? Is there a cult presence in Victoria?
I mean, I feel like something that you have to answer. I feel like what I've definitely seen, it's something where it's like, there could be a cult presence almost anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, I live in a fairly small town, 80,000 people. Okay, I believe that there's a place like somewhere like that cults happen. I mean, I heard if you go into our like inner city park and make little owl noises, you'll find a dude behind a tree with his pants down waiting for you. So, I mean, realistically, I don't know, man. There's a whole bunch of people with weird traditions everywhere. So, is there a cult in Victoria, BC? Probably. But is it like to the level that I don't think so. Like, I mean, it really seems like what we're really trying to differentiate here in this episode is the story like a product of sensationalism, or is that actually like something that's based in reality? And I really think from what we've had and like the information we've consumed, it's definitely a product of sensationalism.
Yeah, or at the very least, like 80-20. Like,
I would say 80-20 is definitely a fair ratio.
Yeah, if these people are using inappropriate methods of therapy like hypnosis, and then believing wholesale in these memories that they're supposedly uncovering, saying nothing about the weird trend that a lot of the memories under these circumstances are satanic and cannibalistic in nature. But it's like
super weird.
It's what you do with what you get out of those sessions, and these people chose to
you think
believe it, sensationalize it, go on a
I mean, we're just hearing from the notes of the therapist that this is like what's going on. Like, do we hear in these recording sessions the therapist kind of coax the imagery of Satan, or coax the imagery of cannibalism? Like, how do these people come to that conclusion in the first place? Like, it would be weird if you're like, okay, in 3 seconds, when I snap my fingers, you're going to be asleep. And then, or your eyes are going to be closed and you're going to be asleep. And then it's like, and then they're sitting there. It's like you're walking through a forest.
Yeah,
and now you see a freaking pit of kids screaming for help. And you're one of those kids, aren't you? No, I don't think so. Yeah, you are. I'm pretty sure.
Describe
Look
the
a little
scene
closer. Look a little closer in the pit. Don't you see one of those kids being you? It's like, no, I don't know why I'm here. This is scary. It's because you were there before. I don't know. It's not so bad. What could be driving these doctors to ensue that kind of thing? Or I don't know. It'd just be weird if the alternative version is you see those hypnosis guys at the fair. They're kind of doing the the staged hypnosis and stuff. They're like, all right, I'm gonna bring a celebrity or a little guest up on stage. We're gonna have a little demonstration here, all right? And he just sits there and he's like, all right, look into this coin. Okay, nice. And when I snap my fingers, you're gonna be in an entranced state. Ready? And he's like, starts screaming memories of devil and cannibalism, and he's like, help me!
Limbs, yeah.
They're eating their skin, and he's like, guys, this is not part of the show. Okay, hey man, chill out. He's like, get away from me! Freaks out and pushes the dude off stage, and it's just this huge what happened up there, honey? He's like, I don't know, but when he snapped his fingers, I was in a pit in the middle of the woods, and there's a whole bunch of people in black robes chanting over me. And it's like, what? It's like, yeah, I don't know, man, but hypnotherapy ain't cool. That would be the alternative to that situation in all reality.
Yeah.
It's
love to hear the recordings, man.
Yeah, it's either a doctor coaxing Satan into your mind while hypnotizing you, or you just literally, that's a side effect of hypnotherapy, and then I would never do that. I would be like,
yeah. Well, there's so many cases though. It's like, how many of the doctors were devoutly Catholic, and how many of the doctors were making money off of it? Probably very few.
Yeah, probably.
So it's what's the motivation for coaxing it?
That's something that we'll have to ask someone who knows a little bit more about this.
I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of want to just put out there. I think the main source of all this information we got is Jen Gerson, right?
Yes. Big thanks to Capital Daily's Jen Gerson. She's got a wonderful article, really putting it all in one place for you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And,
in terms of the Michelle Remembers story, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely would love to reach out to them and get them on the pod and have a discussion with them. They seem to be a little bit more professionally
qualified,
educated. Yeah, they know what they're talking about, and that's the whole point. We don't. So, yeah, I mean, and as far as what we got, it's crazy. We got just tons of stuff on these people getting put in prison for bad stuff that they didn't do. So
yeah, well, I'm sure some of them may have. It's we can't pick sides, but it's
also true. If you're getting convicted for it,
the justice system has to work completely, before I can put stock in any verdict.
That's also true. I feel like I'm speaking of a mind that assumes that everyone who's convicted guilty was wrongly accused. But you never know. You could actually really be like that guy. I know my dad was a lot older than my mom, and he spent time in prison in the 70s. And he was actually in prison with a serial killer who was in that show Mindhunter. I can't remember his name, but he's the big dude. I don't know if you remember that show at all, but essentially, yeah, he's the big serial killer who's in San Jose. and essentially like killed his mom and ate her vagina, like cooked it and ate it. And literally like, yeah, my dad was like, yeah, I knew a guy who ate his mom's, you know what? And I was all like, ew, that sounds gross. Like, why would he do that with his mom? And he's like, no, you like literally did that. Like, he killed her and ate it. And I was like, oh my God. And it's like, yeah, he really did that. And he talked about in the show, it's like something about like, he said something about like getting really messed up stuff, like receiving some fellatio from the mom's decapitated head or something like that. And I think it was like, yeah, I was like, okay, you know, there are people in prison who really do like sick, horrifying stuff, and he like admitted to doing it. Like, you know, he's not like sitting there saying like, oh, I'm innocent, man. No, he's like, yeah, I did that to my mom, and you're just like, so yeah, it's really hard to say.
Yeah, I think like hearing wild stories and, you know, immediately writing them off because they're so wild, and then hearing wild stories and jumping the gun and incarcerating somebody without properly investigating are two different ways to not take it seriously enough.
Yeah,
neither of which is acceptable.
definitely.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I think that's probably all we need to talk on the matter. Probably talked more than we needed to begin with. But again, reach out to us if you're interested. Join the conversation. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot to say on this particular topic. So go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out all the other discussions happening. Check out the stories we mentioned on your own. Again, Capital Daily, Jen Gerson, Urban Exploration Resource. There's a lot out there, and if you're over 35, you've probably got some memories of everything we're discussing. Anyway, like it's probably tough for us to discuss in detail just after reading a handful of articles when we weren't actually there, but it is interesting reading for sure. There's a lot of great coverage out there.
Definitely appreciate everyone who tunes in, and yeah, till next time.
Till next time. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.